Have you ever stopped to think about the power of biblical stories and the impact they can have on your life? These narratives transcend time, offering lessons that not only shaped history, but continue to transform lives today. Whether it's facing monumental challenges, like David defeating Goliath, or rebuilding life after great adversity, like Noah during the flood, the Bible is filled with profound teachings. And the most incredible part, these stories are far more than ancient accounts. They are direct invitations to reflect, take action, and renew our faith, courage, and purpose. What can we learn about trust from Abraham? How can we apply Joseph's wisdom when dealing with betrayal and life's twists and turns? Every character, every event carries practical lessons that can transform the way we face our daily struggles. Get ready to dive into a world of divine wisdom, where the impossible becomes possible and faith breaks through the most impenetrable barriers. Let's explore together how these stories can inspire new attitudes and shed light on our journeys. Are you ready to discover the eternal impact of these divine revelations? Noah lived in a time when corruption prevailed. The earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. Genesis 6:11. Even so, he was called to be an example of righteousness. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. Genesis 6:9. God commanded him to build an ark. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood, 300 cubits long. Genesis 6:14-15. This mission required unwavering faith and complete obedience. During the ark's construction, Noah endured the ridicule of his peers. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Genesis 6:22. His determination teaches us to persevere, even when others don't understand our purpose. Finally, the rain came. For 40 days and 40 nights the rain fell on the earth. Genesis 7:12, fulfilling God's word. The waters prevailed for 150 days. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days, Genesis 7:24, until God remembered Noah. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded, Genesis 8:1. Noah sent out a dove to check the conditions, and it returned with an olive branch. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf, Genesis 8:11. When Noah exited the ark, he offered a sacrifice of gratitude. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, Genesis 8:20. And God established his covenant. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth, Genesis 9:13. The rainbow became an eternal symbol of hope and renewal, reminding us of God's faithfulness. This story teaches us about obedience, resilience, and trust in the divine plan. Just as Noah was called to build an ark, we are invited to construct our spiritual arks, preparing for life's challenges. God continues to sustain us, just as he sustained Noah, with promises of mercy and purpose. Abraham was called by God to leave his land and family. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. He obeyed without hesitation, trusting in God's promises. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. Genesis 12:2. His faith was so profound that he departed without knowing his final destination. Hebrews 11:8. God reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham, promising countless descendants. Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be. Genesis 15:5. Even in the face of natural impossibilities, like his advanced age, Abraham believed. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. This act of faith remains an eternal example. The ultimate test came when God asked for Isaac's sacrifice. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. Genesis 22:2. Abraham climbed Mount Moriah, carrying the wood and his trust in God. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. Genesis 22:8. At the critical moment, an angel stopped him, and a ram was provided. Genesis 22:13. Thomas's doubt wasn't mere empty skepticism, it was a genuine quest for answers. Imagine the emotional turmoil he faced, following Jesus with such devotion, only to witness his crucifixion. It's natural that, amidst such confusion, he withdrew and began questioning. Who hasn't had moments where everything seemed lost, and even hope felt like an illusion? Thomas teaches us that doubt can be a meaningful part of a spiritual journey. When the other disciples declared that they had seen the risen Jesus, Thomas didn't accept it immediately. In John 20:25, he made his stance clear. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. This might sound stubborn, but in truth, it reveals a heart longing for certainty. Thomas didn't want a faith built on rumors or second-hand accounts. He wanted to experience the truth for himself. Thomas's reaction reflects something profoundly human, the need for proof in the midst of pain. How many times during difficult moments do we find ourselves questioning even the things we've always believed? It's at this point that doubt becomes an invitation to reflect rather than an enemy to fear. Thomas shows that doubt, when faced with sincerity, can lead us to a deeper understanding. Interestingly, Thomas's absence during Jesus' first appearance to the disciples symbolizes something many of us experience: isolation in pain. He was so overwhelmed that he chose to be alone. This highlights the danger of withdrawing from those who can help us in times of crisis. Community is essential, but like Thomas, we sometimes need time to process our emotions before we can reconnect. Thomas's request for tangible proof wasn't met with reprimand by Jesus. This teaches us that God understands our weaknesses. Thomas wasn't condemned for his disbelief. Instead, his need was met with compassion. How often do we harshly judge ourselves for questioning, when in reality, those very questions can lead us to a deeper understanding of faith? Practically speaking, this can mean seeking clarity during uncertain times. If you feel your faith wavering, why not delve deeper into the foundations of what you believe? Read the scriptures, talk to wise counselors, or even write down your doubts. Like Thomas, you may discover answers that strengthen your confidence. Another fascinating aspect is how Thomas verbalized his doubts. He didn't stay silent, pretending to believe just to please the other disciples. That honesty is a powerful lesson. Instead of masking our insecurities, it's better to bring them into the open. Only then can we find real answers and reconnect with what is true. Of course, Thomas's doubt was only part of his journey. What happened next changed not only his life, but also how we understand the relationship between faith and evidence. Because doubt doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something extraordinary. 8 days after the resurrection, Thomas finally had his long-awaited encounter with Jesus. And what an encounter it was. Imagine the impact of seeing the risen Christ addressing him directly, repeating the very words that echoed his doubts. Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. John 20:27. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a direct and personal response to his insecurities. That moment revealed something essential. Jesus doesn't reject sincere doubts, he invites us to overcome them. Thomas's reaction was as powerful as his initial doubt. Upon touching Jesus' wounds, he uttered the famous confession, "My Lord and my God." John 20:28. These words carry immense weight, representing not only the acknowledgement of the resurrection, but also the total acceptance of Christ's divinity. Thomas, who sought proof, found something far greater, a transformative faith. This moment reminds us that even our deepest doubts can lead to the greatest revelations. The touch of Jesus' wounds was more than just physical evidence. It was a connection to the redemptive sacrifice he had made. By allowing Thomas to touch the marks of his crucifixion, Jesus was showing that faith doesn't eliminate pain, but transforms it. Just as Jesus' scars symbolized victory over death, our own scars can serve as testimonies of resilience and grace. It's fascinating how Jesus dealt with Thomas. He didn't come with reprimands or judgment, but with patience and empathy. How often do we feel insecure about expressing our doubts for fear of being judged? Jesus' encounter with Thomas teaches us that love and understanding are far more effective ways to strengthen faith than criticism or demands. Practically speaking, this inspires us to approach our doubts with sincerity and active seeking. If you feel the need for a transformative encounter, why not create space for it? Take time to meditate, pray, or even reflect quietly on your uncertainties. Who knows? Like Thomas, you may find the answers you've been seeking in a personal and profound way. Another remarkable point is that by addressing Thomas's doubts, Jesus also taught a valuable lesson to all future believers. He said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," John 20:29. This doesn't diminish Thomas's experience, but elevates the significance of faith that transcends the need for visible proof. It's an invitation to trust in what we cannot see, but know to be true. The impact of this encounter goes beyond Thomas. His story shows that each of us has a unique path to faith. Some need signs, while others rely on unshakable trust. Both paths are valid as long as they lead to the same destination, a deep connection with God. The key is to never stop seeking. After touching Jesus' wounds and making his confession, Thomas's life was never the same. That experience transformed him from a doubtful disciple into a living testimony of the resurrection. But what would he do with that transformation? That leads us to his mission beyond borders. Thomas's transformation wasn't just internal, it propelled him into grand actions. After his encounter with the risen Jesus, Thomas became a fervent missionary, determined to take the gospel beyond known borders. He didn't stay comfortable in his zone of familiarity. According to Christian tradition, Thomas carried Christ's message to India, specifically to the region of Kerala. Imagine the courage it took to cross cultural and geographical boundaries, leaving everything behind to fulfill the command in Matthew 28:19. Go and make disciples of all nations. Thomas's decision to preach in India is a testament to his unshakable faith. He left behind the familiar to enter unknown territories, facing cultural, linguistic, and religious challenges. Have you ever thought about what it means to step out of your comfort zone and dive into the unknown for a greater cause? Like Thomas, we are often called to cross borders in our lives, whether emotional, professional, or spiritual. Thomas's mission is an inspiring example of obedience to God's call. He didn't just proclaim the gospel, he established Christian communities that exist to this day. The St. Thomas Christians in the Kerala region stand as a living testament to his legacy. This shows us that acts of faith can have lasting impacts, influencing future generations. Consider the small decisions you make today. They might have far-reaching consequences you can't yet imagine. Facing cultural barriers wasn't just a challenge for Thomas, it was an opportunity. He understood that the gospel was universal, capable of bridging any divide. Today, this teaches us the importance of building bridges, not walls. Whether in the workplace, within families, or in the community, Thomas's message invites us to engage with those who are different from us, seeking unity instead of division. It's impossible to overlook Thomas's bravery and his mission. He knew that his calling wasn't free from danger. According to tradition, he faced intense persecution and ultimately was martyred for his faith. His willingness to die for the gospel reflects an absolute commitment to Christ. It makes us reflect, how far are we willing to go for what we believe in? For those who wish to apply Thomas's lesson in their lives, the key is to start small. You may not cross oceans, but you can begin by sharing your faith or values within your own community. Participate in a social project, support a cause, or simply be present for those around you. Every act of kindness is a seed that can grow and impact lives. Thomas's mission also challenges us to be creative in how we communicate important messages. He adapted his preaching to the local culture, demonstrating that the gospel is flexible and accessible to everyone. In an increasingly connected world, how can we use our skills to spread the ideas and values we believe in? Perhaps through social media, local initiatives, or simple day-to-day conversations. Ultimately, Thomas showed that true faith knows no limits. He crossed physical and spiritual boundaries, spreading the gospel with passion and commitment. His journey, however, didn't end with his mission. It connects to the deeper lessons his life offers us, which we'll explore next. Thomas's story teaches something profound. Faith and doubt are not enemies, but parts of the same process. It's comforting to know that even a disciple who walked with Jesus had moments of uncertainty. Thomas shows us that doubt can be a tool for spiritual growth. Instead of running from it, he faced it and sought answers. This invites us to do the same. Rather than ignoring our questions, we should bring them to God with sincerity and openness. A striking point is Thomas's honesty. He verbalized his doubts without fear of judgment. Often we're tempted to hide our insecurities, but Thomas teaches us that vulnerability is a pathway to strengthening faith. Think of situations where you hesitated to share your concerns. Why not follow Thomas's example and seek support through a conversation with trusted people or moments of prayer? Jesus' response to Thomas's doubts is equally inspiring. He didn't rebuke him, but welcomed him with patience and compassion, offering the proof he needed. This shows us God's character. He understands our weaknesses and wants to help us overcome them. Just as Jesus guided Thomas to certainty, he will also guide us if we seek him with a sincere heart. Scripture, such as Jeremiah 29:13, reinforces the idea that seeking answers is part of the spiritual growth process. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. This promise is not just for Thomas, but for all of us. It's a motivation to deepen our relationship with God, especially in moments of uncertainty. One practical example we can take from this is the importance of staying connected to a faith community. Thomas withdrew after the crucifixion, but it was within the disciples' community that he found Jesus again. This reminds us that in difficult times, we must stay close to those who share our faith. Whether through study groups, spiritual gatherings, or even informal conversations, connection with fellow believers strengthens us. Thomas's journey also teaches us that faith is built over time and through experience. It doesn't always emerge instantly. Just as he needed a personal moment with Jesus to grow spiritually, we too should seek our own experiences to solidify our convictions. This could be through prayer, reading scripture, or even actions that connect us to God's purpose. Another crucial lesson is that our doubts can become a powerful testimony. Thomas's transformation from a doubtful disciple to a dedicated missionary shows that God can use our weaknesses to impact the lives of others. When we overcome our challenges, we can share those experiences to inspire and strengthen those around us. Finally, Thomas's story challenges us to trust in God's promises, even when we don't fully understand his plan. This trust doesn't mean the absence of questions, but rather the willingness to bring our questions to the right source. After all, just like Thomas, we can find not only answers, but also a transformation that leads us to a deeper relationship with the Lord. And speaking of transformation, his journey also left a lasting legacy. When we think about Thomas in the Gospels, it's impossible not to acknowledge his initial willingness to follow Jesus. He wasn't someone who hesitated when faced with challenges. In John 11:16, he said to the other disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." This statement is more than a display of courage. It reflects his loyalty and commitment to Christ's calling, who today would be willing to risk everything, even their life, for something they believe in. The context in which this declaration was made is important. Jesus was determined to return to Judea to raise Lazarus, even knowing that the religious leaders were plotting to kill him. While the other disciples were reluctant and afraid, Thomas stood out for his bravery. This reminds us that often it takes a steadfast heart to act when everyone else hesitates. How different would our lives be if we had Thomas's courage in our own challenges? Thomas's attitude wasn't just an act of bravery. It also revealed an acceptance of the risks involved in following Jesus. He knew the path of discipleship wasn't safe, but he didn't let fear paralyze him. How often are we called to walk difficult paths, knowing there may be consequences? Thomas teaches us that the greater purpose of following Christ is worth any sacrifice. What makes Thomas even more fascinating is that he wasn't a blind idealist. His declaration in John 11:16 also carried a tone of realism. He knew the risk was real and that death was a possibility. This balance between courage and awareness is something we can apply to our decisions today. Being brave doesn't mean ignoring dangers, but facing them with determination. However, this initial willingness didn't mean Thomas was free from doubts or insecurities. He, like all of us, was human and subject to moments of questioning. Even so, his loyalty kept him close to Jesus. This encourages us to continue, even when our emotions waver between faith and fear. The journey of faith isn't always linear, and that's okay. Thomas's call in the Gospels reflects what it means to leave everything behind for a greater purpose. He abandoned his old life to follow Jesus, not knowing exactly what it would entail. In a world that often values security above all else, Thomas's example is an invitation to live boldly and embrace the unknown when we feel God's calling. It's interesting to note that, despite his courage, Thomas was likely seen by the other disciples as a realist, perhaps even a skeptic. This demonstrates that within the body of Christ there is room for different personalities and perspectives. Isn't it amazing to think that God uses our unique characteristics, whether courage, doubt, or even skepticism, to fulfill his plans? Thomas's initial willingness was a prelude to his journey, which would be marked by even greater challenges. The courage he displayed in following Jesus would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. This is where the tension between his initial faith and the moments of doubt yet to come began to emerge. After Jesus' crucifixion, Thomas's faith was shaken. Imagine the impact of seeing the one in whom he had placed all his hopes being crucified. He had left everything to follow Jesus, and suddenly it seemed as if it had all come to a tragic end. This moment of pain and confusion led Thomas to isolate himself. How often, in the face of disappointment, do we choose to withdraw instead of seeking support? His reaction reflects the humanity we all share. When the disciples said they had seen the risen Jesus, Thomas responded with skepticism. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." John 20:25. This statement, often interpreted as disbelief, actually reveals a wounded man struggling to believe again. His doubt wasn't outright rejection, but an expression of his need for evidence to sustain his faith. It's interesting that Thomas didn't accept the word of the other disciples. He wanted a personal experience with the risen Christ. This teaches us something important. Genuine faith isn't built solely on what we hear from others, but on what we live and experience ourselves. Like Thomas, perhaps we should seek a deeper, personal connection with God, especially in times of uncertainty. Thomas's absence during Jesus' first appearance symbolizes something deeply human: isolation in times of pain. He wasn't with the other disciples, likely consumed by his grief and doubt. This reminds us of the importance of the faith community. In difficult times, isolation may seem like a solution. But it is often within the fellowship of other believers that we find comfort and answers. Thomas's doubts didn't make him less worthy in Jesus' eyes. In fact, they paved the way for one of the most significant moments in the gospel. This episode reminds us that God isn't offended by our sincere questions. On the contrary, He invites us to bring our insecurities to Him. Thomas shows us that it's possible to question and still remain on the path of faith. In today's world, how can we apply this lesson? Perhaps you're going through a period of uncertainty. Why not seek clarity through prayer, reading scripture, or talking with someone you trust? Just as Thomas found answers by being honest about his doubts, you too can discover a new level of faith by confronting your own questions. Thomas's journey shows that doubt isn't a sign of spiritual failure, but an opportunity to grow. He wasn't satisfied with a maybe or a superficial answer. He wanted concrete proof. This genuine search led him to a transformative experience. Similarly, our questions can lead us to a deeper relationship with God, as long as we face them with an open heart. Thomas's doubts were only a part of his journey. What he didn't yet realize was that those questions would be answered in a way that would change not only his life, but also the history of Christianity. And that's exactly what we see as we explore his transformative encounter. Thomas's meeting with the risen Jesus was a moment of total transformation. When Jesus addressed him directly, saying, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." John 20:27. It wasn't just an invitation to touch his wounds, but also a response to the doubts Thomas had expressed so sincerely. Imagine the impact of hearing Jesus repeat exactly what Thomas had said days earlier, showing that he knew his inner struggles. Touching Jesus' wounds was more than just about proving the resurrection. It was also an act of connection with Christ's sacrifice. These marks, which to many might seem like signs of defeat, were actually symbols of victory over sin and death. By touching those wounds, Thomas not only found the proof he sought, but also a reminder of the cost of redemption. This invites us to reflect on how our own scars can tell stories of resilience and faith. When Thomas finally touched the marks of Jesus, he didn't just accept the resurrection. He proclaimed one of the most powerful declarations in the gospel, "My Lord and my God." John 20:28. This confession is significant because it acknowledges both Christ's divinity and lordship. It's as if Thomas was saying, "Now I see and fully believe." His experience reminds us that God is willing to reveal himself in ways that strengthen our faith if we are open to seeking him. Jesus' gesture of allowing Thomas to touch his wounds was an example of divine patience. He could have rebuked Thomas for his disbelief, but instead he chose a path of empathy. This teaches us that God understands our weaknesses and is willing to walk with us in our moments of doubt. It's a powerful reminder that faith isn't built solely in moments of certainty, but also in transformative encounters. For us, who haven't had the chance to physically touch Christ's marks, this episode still carries a strong message. Jesus said to Thomas, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John 20:29. This statement encourages us to trust in God even when we lack tangible evidence. It's a call to faith based on trust and spiritual experience, not just what we can see or touch. This moment also highlights the deeply personal nature of our relationship with God. Jesus approached Thomas uniquely, addressing his specific doubts. This reminds us that God knows us individually and cares about our needs. Just as Jesus dealt with Thomas's doubts, he is also ready to address ours in a personal and transformative way. In practical terms, Thomas's example challenges us to be honest with our own doubts and to actively seek answers. While you may not have the opportunity to touch physical wounds, you can experience God's presence through prayer, reflection, or even the testimonies of others. The more we seek, the more we are transformed by these encounters. After touching Christ's wounds and making his confession, Thomas's life took a new direction. He didn't just believe, he became a living testimony of the resurrection. That encounter wasn't the end of his journey, but the beginning of his mission to spread the gospel beyond the borders he once knew, and this mission deserves to be explored further. After his transformative encounter with Jesus, Thomas became a figure of unshakable faith. His life was marked by profound change, from a doubtful disciple to a bold missionary. According to Christian tradition, he went beyond the borders of his known world, bringing the gospel to India. This journey reflects the impact that a personal experience with God can have. Imagine the power of a transformation so profound that it leads you to cross continents for a greater cause. Thomas's mission in India was more than an act of courage. It was an expression of total obedience to Jesus' call. He knew that preaching the gospel in unfamiliar lands meant facing cultural, linguistic, and religious challenges, yet he persisted. His dedication inspires us to reflect on our own level of commitment. Are we willing to step out of our comfort zones to fulfill our purpose? The establishment of Christian communities in Kerala, known as the St. Thomas Christians, stands as enduring evidence of his impact. These communities still exist today, nearly 2,000 years later, as a living testament to his faithfulness. This legacy challenges us to think, what kind of mark are we leaving on the world? Like Thomas, our actions can have effects far beyond our time. Thomas faced intense persecution for his faith, ultimately culminating in his martyrdom. According to tradition, he was killed while preaching the gospel, remaining faithful to the very end. His willingness to give his life for Christ reflects a faith that transcends any fear or doubt. This compels us to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go for what we believe in? His courage is an invitation to evaluate our own devotion. Thomas's legacy also highlights the role of sacrifice in the journey of faith. He understood that following Jesus wasn't just about receiving blessings, but also about carrying one's cross. In a world that so often values comfort above all else, his story reminds us that true spiritual growth often requires effort and surrender. Reflect on the areas of your life where you might be avoiding challenges that could lead you to a deeper relationship with God. It's fascinating how God used Thomas's doubts to shape him into a living testimony. His transformation shows that our weaknesses don't disqualify us, but can instead be a starting point for something greater. This encourages us to bring our struggles and insecurities to God, trusting that He can use us exactly as we are. After all, it was Thomas's doubt that led to a confession of faith that still echoes today. Another aspect of his legacy is how he adapted the gospel to the cultures he encountered. Thomas demonstrated that Christ's message is universal but must be communicated in ways that resonate with people. This challenges us to be creative in how we share our faith, whether through everyday conversations or larger initiatives. Like Thomas, we can find ways to connect the gospel to the realities around us. Thomas's impact goes far beyond his earthly life. His story continues to inspire generations of believers, reminding us that doubt doesn't have to mark the end of faith, but can instead be the beginning of a powerful journey. His life challenges us to live with courage, commitment, and purpose, knowing that God can transform even our greatest uncertainties into a testimony that echoes throughout eternity. Thomas's journey, from a doubtful disciple to a fearless missionary, is a powerful testament to how God can turn our weaknesses into strengths and our doubts into unwavering faith. His story teaches us that we don't need to run from our questions, but face them with sincerity and seek answers at the right source. Just as Thomas found purpose and courage, we too can discover that even our greatest uncertainties can be the start of something extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, take inspiration from Thomas and share this message. Subscribe to the channel to continue following more stories like this. Stories that challenge, encourage, and strengthen faith. Leave a comment letting us know what stood out to you the most in Thomas's journey, his doubt, his transformation, or his courage. We want to hear your thoughts. And remember, sharing is an act of faith. Send this video to your friends, family, or anyone you believe could be impacted by this story. Together, we can spread this message and inspire even more lives. After all, we all have something to learn from Thomas's example. Until the next transformative story,